I am Michael Reinewesser, the president of the BTI Consulting Group, and again, we're delighted to have you here. We're broadcasting today from just outside of Boston, where it is an amazing 57 degrees for Boston in January. So we're enjoying the day as well as the webinar. So what we'd like to do today is take a look at the market, take a look at what is impacting law firms, and what kinds of tactics, strategies are really driving the success of the law firms that are enjoying success, and what challenges are being posed to those law firms that may not be enjoying that same kind of success. What I'd like to do, though, is start with a pop quiz, and we'll test how well everybody can use the comment and ask a question feature. You will see a picture or an image on your screen. The first three individuals that can identify the gentleman on the right reading the newspaper will get a copy of both of my signed books, Clientelligence and the ABCs of Client Service. And we'll just give that a minute or two to come in. But we think that this particular picture and this individual is kind of symbolic of what's happening in today's market and what we need to worry about. It's interesting. It looks like we do have at least a couple of winners here. And the gentleman on your right reading the newspaper, his name is Apollo Robbins. And Apollo Robbins is acknowledged to be the most skilled, the most adept, and the most thoughtful pickpocket in the world today. Now, why would we put a picture of Apollo Robbins here at the beginning of our webinar? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First, Apollo Robbins is one of the good guys. Apollo Robbins is a consultant to the FBI, to the Secret Service. In fact, there is a true story where Apollo Robbins was at a security event for the President of the United States, and at the end of the event, Apollo Robbins returned a copy of the President's agenda, which he had picked out of the pocket of a Secret Service agent. So he is quite skilled, he's quite accomplished, and he spends a lot of his time helping people avoid and go away from security issues. But what he does to be so good at being a pickpocket and taking things from very, very skilled people who you wouldn't expect that he could, is he studies his subject. He analyzes his subject. He'll look at a subject from 35, 50, 100 different vantage points, and then he integrates his behaviors into that of his target. And by the time he has been able to get what he wants or his target object, the person whom he is looking at or targeting has no idea what's happened. Again, Mr. Robbins has pickpocketed some of the best in the entire world, and this is what is going on in law firms today. If you look at law firms, how they compete, when we first experienced slow growth going back to the 2008, 2009 time frame, we refer to this as a predator's paradise, meaning that those firms that were aggressive were getting more share than those that weren't. And that's really changed. Now, it's not just being a predator, it's being a smart predator. Are you able to outmaneuver, integrate, better understand? Are you able to integrate what you're doing into client behavior so you can just get the new business that's coming into the market? Because as we're going to see, there is new business coming into the marketplace. And once you get that, how do you keep that without little law firms other than knowing that you've taken this business and you're enjoying these gains? So in order to put this in perspective, what we've done is we have sized the market, as we've done for the last 16 years or so, back to 2001. And the bottom half of each of these columns is the total U.S. spending on outside counsel. The top half of each bar is the amount that goes to the internal corporate legal spending. at each large corporation. And what you've got is really kind of a couple of dynamics going on here. The first and most important one is that if you look at the spending from 2001 to 2016, what you'll see, of course, is that 2016 registers a highest number of spending that we've seen, and we believe this is a complete record of $102.3 billion. But the challenge, of course, is that this bottom half, if you see the darker columns at the bottom, the outside counsel spending has not been growing. In 2009, it was $56.7 billion. It's gone up to $60.3 billion. Most of the gains have actually come up here, where you can see the cursor from my mouse, where it's gone from $33.5 billion all the way up to $42 billion in spending. This, amongst other things, has been one of the biggest challenges for law firms to face, because clients are starting to bring work in-house that used to go to law firms. So it's one thing to be able to compete against each other. Now we've got to find a way to convince clients that the work ought to be going out to law firms as well. This means that unlike the boom times of 2001 to 2008, where you see this giant growth in outside counsel spending, what you see is almost a reversal, is the growth is all up in the outside counsel spending, while law firms stay flat right around the $60 billion mark. So the challenge that we're going to talk about is twofold. One is, how do we create an environment where clients are going to be more inclined to move and transfer some of the spending up at the top to outside counsel law firms? And then how do we grow when there's no incremental new dollars coming into the marketplace? And growth is paramount to any law firm or any professional service firm, for that matter, because growth creates opportunity within the firm for new associates, for new partners, to be able to expand and invest in the kinds of things that it takes to succeed. Requires law firms to get more and be able to keep the share of what they have and add to it so that they can expand and protect what they have as their relationships grow, and as clients, as you can see, to continue to spend more money should we be able to get that spending back to the outside counsel phase. Now, as we've looked at this, and we've looked at this a number of ways, but the most compelling aspect of this is when we analyzed roughly 200 law firms, and we took a 5-year look, and we said, okay, which law firms are really gaining market share, and which law firms are giving up market share? Because at the end of the day, if we're not gaining market share and we're giving up market share, it usually takes between 2 to 3 years for market share losses to translate into actual losses of clients. So if we're losing share, it's not just some esoteric aspect of the marketplace. These are actual clients which will disappear and just leave the client base. So we divided up the law firms into 3 categories. Big law, which is roughly 650 lawyers or more. We've got the mid-sized law firms that are going from about 300 to the 650 or so. And then you've got the smaller law firms that are below that. When we analyzed the growth of each of these groups of law firms, what we found is when we compared it to the growth in outside counsel spending as well as the overall market, so you could use either metric, the group that was gaining the most share is big law, 650 law firms or more, with 60% of those firms gaining share at the expense of others, because this is a fixed, basically the market has remained fixed for the last 7-8 years. Mid-sized law firms are about half and half. So 50% have been gaining share, 50% have been losing share. Now, it looks like the firms that have really been the most exposed to this marketplace is the smaller firms. And the smaller firms, you can see only 34% are gaining share. And what we found, of course, is that this is, a situation where our research says that many of the smaller firms are focused more on profits and maintaining profits per attorney and profits per partner, as opposed to looking out into the marketplace. What we're going to see is that, many times what we hear from the law firm community is that big law is winning because they have, perhaps a name, perhaps they, are of larger scale or have the right geographic footprint. But what we're showing and what our research shows when we go out into the marketplace is that these large clients are actually working a lot smarter than most other law firms. And this is what's driving their gains in market share, their ability to get twice as many gains in market share as the smaller firms. And it is this pattern that is probably going to drive the gains as we move forward in the future. When we say that these firms are moving and working in a smarter way, what do we mean? Well, when we looked at the business development budget, the marketing and business development budget for about 160 law firms or so, what we found is that when you look at the different categories, I'm going to highlight specifically client development. It's the second line down. And what you see is that the largest 30 law firms, which we'll use as a proxy for the largest firms, are spending 1/3 more than all other law firms. They're spending 34.4% versus 28.7%, 28.6%, 26.1%. So they're actually taking more money, taking money out of other activities, and putting it into, very specifically, into client development. Now, because they're so focused on client development and they are spending more money to develop clients, it is not unsurprising that these firms are getting the most gains. Because, as we said, they're working smarter, they have more information, they're focusing on it, they're spending more money on it, they're expecting more returns on it. And this right now is one of the big differentiators between big law and everybody else, is they're the first to focus so much of their resources on clients, probably because they are under the most pressure to grow because they're so large, and it's harder to grow the larger you get. So whatever the reason is that they got there, they're spending their money in a way that is generating better results than other law firms, and that is one of the key reasons they're gaining. Now, for those of you that remember seeing this statistic from last year, the AmLaw 30 were spending about 32% of their budget on client development. So this has actually gone up 2 full percentage points, meaning that these large law firms continue to direct their money into the place where they're having the most success. And that's probably the reason that this is growing and will continue to grow as long as it's showing the kind of results, especially if other law firms stay in their retreat position. If they don't spend as much, they're going to be left vulnerable, and we'll continue to see success go to the larger firms. So the flip side of that, of course, is it compels every other law firm to sit back and say, what are we spending on client development? How do we proportionally match? You don't have to match dollar for dollar per se, but at least proportionately spend the same amount of resources, putting the same priority on building those client relationships and targeted relationships, which are the absolute best source of new business in today's environment. Now, we are frequently asked what is included in client development. Client development includes the following: in-depth client feedback from independent sources. This would be, of course, contrasted with the client feedback you get from leadership partners and the relationship partners in your firms. Virtually all of these firms that are gaining share are doing both, and it's coming out of the client development budget. The second is really two messages. These client development initiatives include the client teams and all the activities that they engage in, but one big difference between these client teams and other client teams we see outside of big law is that these client teams are funded. They have a budget. Partners and members of the team are expected to spend that budget in very specific ways, meaning that they're targeted towards the client, and they are measured on these activities as they are measured on the same other activities with the same veracity as other activities in the firm. They're developing client-specific tools such as individually customized CLE sessions, checklists for individual clients. There are firms that now have client-specific training, meaning that they will train you in the culture, in the dynamics, in the whole organization, the legal structure of how these big clients work, what they expect, what the hiring decision is like, what the process is like to deliver work, what their expectations are. Not just relying on, a kickoff meeting and mentoring and informal communication between members of the team. These are formalized training. These are highly structured, and they are geared solely at improving the client experience and developing business with these clients. It includes multiple annual client visits, and I think this is very important because we speak to so many partners in law firms who talk about visiting clients once a year. We're starting to see these big law firms go out and visit clients 2 and 3 times a year, whether there's something going on or not. In fact, there are some partners who tell me that when they go see a client and they happen to be in between matters, that visit is more important because they want to stay in touch with the client, they want to learn what's going on, they want to learn why they're not working on a matter because all these clients always have a lot of matters in process. So they're going out and having face-to-face meetings multiple times a year. They're investing in original and primary research. So this isn't just going out and searching headlines. This is going out and whether they're digging up information from the independent client feedback, whether they're doing it from industry research, whether they're doing it from the deal structures or the litigations they've worked on. The point is that this is information that is not available to someone else, that originates in these firms. And it is targeted to be useful for clients. And then finally, programs and content for the individual clients and prospects that are designed to be the centerpiece of events, of highly focused webinars, not broad webinars where we're inviting thousands or hundreds of people, but a small number of potential clients and clients, again, sometimes using the original and primary research as the content for these programs. But all of these kind of fit together because if you've got the independent client feedback, it makes it easier to drive the team. If you're visiting with the client, it makes it easier to develop the client-specific training that tells everybody working on this client how to behave with this client. All of a sudden, you've got this very robust set of integrated activities aimed at driving business and keeping clients. And again, that is what the advantage that the large firms have at the moment. Now, this isn't something that is only known by large firms. When we went out and we interviewed 159 CMOs or law firm leaders at law firms of all sizes, we said, what is it, in your opinion, in your experience, that is the most successful in really driving revenue? Okay, number one, what is it? And then we asked them how important it was to their marketing strategy. So what you can see when you move over to the left is that the left is the ability to drive the revenue, but on the bottom is the importance to the marketing strategy. So what happens is we've got at the very top, the higher the activity, the more successful it is at driving revenue. The more to the right it is, the more important it is to the marketing strategy of a particular law firm. You can see the number one activity to drive revenue successfully at the very top, right here, is client feedback. Then you've got proposals for specific clients. You've got client teams. You've got referrals from clients to other clients. And then you've got industry teams, which is really tied to the client teams. So tied in ability to drive successful revenue. So what you've got in these 5 activities is the most successful at driving revenue. And if you'll remember back to the last slide, these are primarily the activities that have all been bundled into this category called client development. So virtually all CMOs are familiar with the benefits. It's a question of how do you get the funding and how do you implement. Bing Law has been able to implement. Other firms have been successful in implementing on a more sporadic basis and haven't gotten yet to the point where they've gotten the full funding. But this will be kind of the new vanguard in approaching clients. And one of the key things, it's interesting, if you look at the names of each of these activities, 4 of the 5 of them start with the word client, so maybe this is telling us something in terms of reinforcing the message. So if we were going to sit back and say, what are the tactics that you can take for gaining share, growing your business, growing individual clients, forget your size. Every single law firm can do this. There's no structural barrier to any firm, no matter what size you are. But the first thing we would say is to develop a marketing plan for each individual major client, which includes client feedback and perspective. So not just what the firms and the partners think about the client, but what the client thinks, what they think of you, what they think of your performance, what they think their needs are, the roles that they want you to play, because they will tell you these things if they ask. One of the reasons that this is so successful is that not only is it powerful and robust in helping you understand and position yourself with clients, but purely from a firm dynamic standpoint, if you're one of the largest law firms, roughly 50% of your revenue is coming from somewhere right around 50% of the client base, of 25 clients. So 50% of the revenue will come from roughly the largest 25 clients. That number goes down to about 35% when you go through the AmLaw 200. Then interestingly, when you get up outside the AmLaw 200, that number gets remarkably close to 50% again. So if you think about it, if you're developing an individual marketing plan for your top 25 clients, you have now designed a growth platform and a growth strategy for the biggest and most leverageable portions of your client base. So it's really not only using the strategic benefits, but it's using the revenue distribution of your firms to be able to protect and to grow the revenue as well. So that makes for a very powerful combination. Second, we've been talking about this a lot with law firms in the past probably 6 months especially. Build business development skills of partners willing and able to deliver. We know statistically that somewhere between 25% and a third of all attorneys just simply do not want to have anything to do with business development. Yet law firms go out and train them just as they would training the individuals who really enjoy and are good at business development. Our experience shows not just in law but in working with virtually every other professional service arena, from the big 4 accounting to smaller accounting to management consulting to IT consulting to professional engineering and so on, is that building the skills of those partners that like business development and are good at it. So if a partner likes it and is inclined to do it, the chances are they can be successful. If they're already successful, they can get better. But if you've got partners who just don't want to do it, there's no point in putting your money there. You're going to end up with spending money, and you're not going to get good reviews on your programs, and it's going to dampen the enthusiasm of those that really like and are skilled in business development. Develop individual checklists for individual clients. So this can be done literally in 45 minutes. If you sit the partners down by practice or by client, and ask them to write down on a Post-it note one risk, the biggest risk each client faces, with one risk on each piece of a Post-it note. Put the Post-it notes on a wall, ask the partners to prioritize them. You now have content for a highly robust client assessment tool. Everybody on this call can do it. Small firm, large firm, doesn't matter. Clients absolutely love these. They will engage with you, and if you can add something about their industry in it, this is becoming a tremendously important differentiator in terms of evaluating law firms by clients. And clients are looking for industries, specific knowledge, and you're going to see that when we release the BTI Client Service All-Stars on February 7th, how much that has increased in importance for your clients. Creating one piece of original content and using it as a marquee messaging vehicle for the firm. There's probably, I'm going to say somewhere between 15 and 20 law firms out there that have really put their eggs in one basket in terms of original content, and they find ways to use it across the firm to benefit at least 4 practices of substance within their firm. What this does is it creates not only a uniform message, but it educates clients and it attracts the best clients, because the best clients love original content that they can't get somewhere else. You can do this with large-scale surveys. There's one firm that used associates to go out and review all the deals of a certain size, M&A deals, and analyze the structures and catalog the structures and how they've changed over the years and develop that as their content. So you can go many different ways. The point and the recommendation is to find the content in your firm or find the content outside your firm. But content is really driving and attracting marquee level clients who are seeing this as a source of not just value added, but the kind of counsel they can expect. It's a proxy for the kind of counsel they can expect from the law firms that they choose to work with. 5, especially existing clients, dive into analyzing client dockets and workload, and then recommend new approaches to streamline the process, to reduce their risk, to better organize their caseload, to find ways to save money in spending on these matters. I know probably I can think of 7 law firms who have done this in a very substantive, serious way. Each one will tell you that they walked away with more business than their wildest dreams when they went into this process. The big benefit here is because you see so many different legal departments, because your partners see so many ways that it's managed, they can provide almost immediate value and counsel on how to spot the places to make things easier to manage, how to reduce risk, how to naturally put these together in a more effective and efficient way. And clients just love it because it's immediate value to them. It not only saves them money, it saves them time. It usually saves them time in their mind the day that you provide the recommendation. So we're seeing this being very effective. And then finally, large-scale use of independent client feedback. Again, dozens to hundreds of interviews by a third party and acting on that feedback. This is the only recommendation that you will see that was in our webinar annual outlook last year as well. We still see this trend growing. We see it delivering tremendous results, not just the client here, not just the client there, but what it's doing is it is embedding this kind of thinking. How am I doing with my client? What could I be doing better? And here's what my client wants. It embeds it in the firm because the partners are all talking about it, embracing it, and using it to feed those client development activities in the larger firms where they have the bigger budget, and all of a sudden it becomes part of the culture of the firm. So again, it stands behind driving revenue, and as a reminder, most CMOs who are in law firms today see client feedback as the single biggest tool to generate revenue. So all of this kind of fits together to get where law firms want to go, which is how do we grow and how do we protect ourselves. Now, once we understand those tactics, it makes it a little bit easier to look out into the marketplace and say, how do we use these strategies to build business, but also how do we map it against where the different practices are headed, what dynamics are playing out in terms of pricing, and we map that out every year in our BTI Practice Outlook report, used to be known as the BTI Spending Outlook. And what we do is we take each practice based on more than 300 some odd interviews and 16 years of experience, and we map out where each practice will be in 2017. So as you look at the chart in front of you, what you'll see is the circles which represent the individual practices. The circle size is the size of the individual practice, with the 1-inch circle at the bottom, the reference circle, being about $1 billion market opportunity. To give you a sense, employment is about $4 billion, so you can use that as a reference point. And you can see that if you look at the line running down the middle of the chart right here, this is the average rate, if you will. And what we try to do is see which practices are going to get premium rates, which are going to be on the right, and those that are going to be under more price pressure, which are going to be over on the left. And at the same time, we have this horizontal line running across the chart. That is the projected market growth. You can see it's just under 1%. So any practice that is growing more than 1%, what you'll find is that it will have some incremental dollars coming into the marketplace that you may not have to necessarily steal from someone else, although you definitely will have some serious competition. Any practice that's below the line, you have to fight another law firm to get that, because that's existing money. It's not new money coming into the marketplace. When you put the matrix together and you end up in this upper right-hand quadrant, we call those the priority practices, because those are the practices that are getting the new incremental dollars, and they're also getting higher rates because they're to the right of all the other practices. When you look at it, what's interesting is there is one practice that sits at the epicenter of all these practices, and that is intellectual property. That would be compared to IP litigation, which is over here to the right and shrinking a little bit after a number of years of good growth. But IP is a little bit of a unique practice in that it has a lot of activity going on with alternative and creative fees. You have clients that want to be able to do their patent prosecution in the same place. They get their counseling and advice and their litigation. So you see kind of parts of IP that are going to be price sensitive. You see parts of IP that are getting higher rates. Usually that's under some kind of creative or alternative fee. And you kind of see all points in IP, but the others are pretty much distinctly in one place or another. Starting with M&A, what you've got is really a tale of two markets. We've got the big, giant mega deals, of which there have been fewer announced lately, partly because of the uncertainty in the political climate, whether Trump is pro-business or anti-business or how that plays out. What most clients and corporate counsel are saying is that they don't want to necessarily have a big appetite for a giant transaction when they don't know what exactly the future is going to look like. There's a little bit too much uncertainty. but there still may be some large transactions that are looming despite that. But that pace is going to slow down. The other part of the market is the mid-sized deals and the smaller deals, which continue to show tremendous growth. The appetite by large companies for smaller and mid-sized companies just continues to be almost insatiable. Large companies have learned that it's hard to grow their top lines based on them going out and gaining share because they're all in such tight markets. So what they do is they go out and they either try to buy market share or access to market share. So they're buying access to markets, they're buying channels to the marketplace, they're buying new technologies to develop new products. In some cases, they're buying product lines. But this segment of the market is quite robust. It is not all that price sensitive. Clients are paying. That doesn't mean they're going to pay anything you want, but we're seeing higher rates overall in that segment of the market, and we see virtually no sign that that mid-size M&A and smaller M&A market is at all impacted by the uncertainty that is hitting the larger transaction marketplace. Then we've got class actions. Class actions, if anybody remembers, if we were going to do this for 5 years, has moved from being down here in the lower left all the way up here, and is now, becoming a verge of being an actual growth practice. We're seeing class actions get larger. We're seeing them get more complex. We're seeing them being driven. They're almost a cousin at this point to product liability. And all of this is being driven by, the belief on the plaintiff side that they have more certainty in their matters and conviction and moving forward, and the same level of conviction that clients want to defend or settle against these increasingly large exposures that they face. So what clients are looking for is, how are you going to be able to understand the exposure and the risk that they face in order to defend them appropriately? That's foremost in their mind. Cybersecurity and data privacy. This continues to be the fastest growing practice. It's slowed a hair from prior years, but still by far the place where just the supply can't keep up with demand. The supply is so, in the minds of clients, limited that they are now going outside of law, and they are looking for consultants. They are looking for other firms that outside of law that may be able to provide them the counseling advice when they need, and use law firms for the cases where they find themselves in some kind of either class action or other lawsuit or investigation with a government agency. So the clients have also become better consumers, so they're pushing harder on the credentials that are being put in front of them. This is pretty much a knowledge-based sell, meaning that if you can't walk in and tell your clients something they don't know about this particular issue or their issue, the chances of making the sale go down dramatically. They want to be taught something. They don't want to hear about experience because they've already heard a lot of stories about experience, and what they need is to learn and educate themselves and answer the questions that they're being faced with. Regulatory. I don't think there's a company in the United States today that is not concerned in some way about the regulations that are impacting their business. If it isn't, up until very recently, the worry about how they're going to be enforced and how they might be enforced in a retroactive or conflicting manner. Now companies are saying, what is the regulatory framework in my industry going to look like? Will there be lightened enforcement? Will there be a different emphasis? Virtually everyone on this webinar has clients who are very eager to discuss what the regulatory impacts will be, especially in healthcare, especially in financial services. especially in pharma, even defense contracting, because the first three, financial services, pharma, healthcare, represent some of the largest segments of spending and regulations. So this is a great opportunity to go out and provide what is primarily now either advice, counsel, and consulting type work, or compliance work for matters that were already in progress. But this is a tremendous conversation opener, business understanding tool for everyone to understand what clients are most concerned about. It's almost a roadmap to understanding your clients. Litigation. Litigation continues to feel the brunt of the budget pressure and the budget cutbacks that are in the market today. Even though there's some redistribution in the types of cases, which we'll talk about in a minute, what we're seeing is, first, some of the litigation is moving in-house, as we talked about at the very beginning of the webinar. The more day-to-day ongoing kinds of litigation is moving or staying in-house. We've got alternative fees where the litigation is the most prevalent place where alternative fees are being used. You can see that half the circle is below the line. So it's kind of, litigation is basically flat. The net is there are new matters coming in, but the new matters are being offset by the matters that are settled. So the actual budget allocation is not really doing anything. It's staying the same. So the challenge for law firms is how do you differentiate yourself? And the way you do that, according to clients, is one is understanding the business, two is being able to approach the litigation matters in a different way. So that would be, again, alternative or creative fees. This would be an ability to devise settlement strategies, because the drive to settle still is at the 48% level that it's been for the past 5 years. Without bringing those into the process, it's going to be very difficult for firms to differentiate themselves, and clients will rely on what kinds of things and what kind of approaches you take more to the litigation portfolio, unless it's about the company, than anything else in evaluating your ability to help them with litigation. And then finally, we've got employment. Employment, for those of you that have been attending the webinar for years, is another practice which has been moving from the left up to the right. We can see that it has moved into, after shrinking for a few years, there is more money going to employment matters. You can credit a whole range of issues, the first being the EEOC and its interpretation of how to deal with everything from LGBT issues to benefits, and then you've got wage and hour, which every year when we talk to a certain group of clients, they say every year they think that wage and hour is going to disappear, and it only seems to become more aggressive and get worse. There's a lot of large suits related to these issues that are either clients believe are going to happen or are in the process of happening. And there's also a lot of advisory work going on here. What we see is clients want counsel and advice on how to handle these situations and what directions they should take. And these are what we are finding are driving the new hiring of law firms in employment, especially for some of the new work that's coming into the marketplace. This is also, like litigation, an area where we see very creative and very aggressive use of alternative fees, carving out chunks of work, carving out pieces of litigation or types of litigation for unit pricing or some kind of predictable pricing pattern. And employment is also an area where we see very aggressive use of educating clients. Of all the practices, I would say it's a tie between M&A and employment as to using education as a tool to get business. So that is doing the research, providing vehicles to have clients believe and feel like they're getting customized information, and then that leads to the discussions which drive the business and get you the kind of business that you want moving forward. Now, bet the company litigation. This is, of course, the most rate insensitive. This gets the highest rates. It gets the highest visibility. And what's happening here is that companies reporting bet the company work has quadrupled over the last 3 years. It's gone from 12% up to 50%. So you've got a lot more companies facing these very large-scale issues with tremendous exposure, but they've got no more budget. If you remember that from slide 1, they've got no more budget. You can see that there's virtually no change in complex or routine. So where is the money coming from? How are they dealing with that? Well, this is where the benefits of AFAs are coming in, and we're seeing them big time. Clients are telling us that the savings they get from alternative fees, you can see the history, it's right around 14%. It went up a little bit in 2016 to 14.6%. Now, if you do the math, that is effectively adding $2.7 million to a large client's legal budget. So what they've done through this use of alternative fees is, created more money, and this is helping them deal with paying the higher rates that they have to pay on bet the company work, and the combination of bringing the more routine litigation in-house and using alternative fees, and also, frankly, price pressure in the routine litigation with law firms is what's creating the money to fund the higher and bigger fees demanded by the bet the company work. If you look at the amount of money under AFA structures, it's gone from $12.4 billion in 2012 to roughly $22.4 billion in 2016. So this is about a 16% growth rate. And I know as I'm presenting this, as I've talked in many times in person, I'm hearing that, Michael, there's a lot of clients out there, when I talk to them about AFAs, they don't get real excited, they don't want to put the effort into it, they don't want to understand it, and that is absolutely right. Because if you look at the blue line on this chart, what you'll see is the number of companies using AFAs is actually going down. It was at 79% in 2012, and it went down to 66% in 2016. The reason being is that it is the large companies with the big litigation budgets that have embraced AFAs. Everybody else that has a small budget, it's not worth their time, depending on the law firm. It's not worth their energy, and they're not going to put the energy to find the savings. But those with have the big budgets, that is where the savings are, and those also make very attractive clients. What we found about AFAs is, they're really not even considered the cornerstone of innovation. When we ask about innovation, AFAs for a long time were number 1. Now they're number, 2, 3, 4. They're part of an even newer normal now. They're expected, especially at those 2/3 of companies. The AFAs are valued. They're well understood by the largest legal spenders. Everybody else is dabbling. They're kind of trying to understand them, and if there's obvious benefit, they'll go there. But if there isn't, well, then they're not going to go there. One of the things we've noticed is that larger clients can now tell you the law firms who are really, really good at AFAs and others that are not so much. And we'll talk about that in what makes the leaders in just a minute. The AFA leaders the law firms that are leaders have a defined process for crafting and implementing their AFAs, many times using feedback to find out exactly what the client wants, how they want to handle their AFAs. One of the big things that separates the law firms that clients say are really good at AFAs and all the others are pre-approval instead of post-approval. What does that mean? That means that the partners are empowered to commit the firm at the time of negotiation. They can shake hands with the client when they're done and say, we've got a deal. If your partners have to go back to an executive committee or go somewhere for an approval after they have a deal, clients are just like, why did I do that? Why did I spend all that time with you? And what happens is they lose faith in what they just negotiated and start thinking about something else. The ability to provide this, what we call pre-approval, that is, having partners enter negotiations with the right parameters, knowing what they can agree to, gives them a lot more confidence, gives the client a lot more confidence, and is one of the key things that will separate you from everybody else. And then finally, using that client feedback to craft specific processes for specific clients, because not every client wants their AFAs the same way. Even though they want fixed fees, there are different ways to arrive at that fixed fee. And your ability to integrate with that is the difference between being viewed as skilled and just learning how to use AFAs. The other big benefit in AFAs is that they map almost directly into the 4 most influential aspects of BTI's 17 activities driving superior client service. You can see here in the upper right, we know they save 14%, so they provide value. If you're negotiating and you can negotiate and commit, you're committed to help. They're certainly client-focused because every client wants certainty. And if you customize it, you understand the client's business. Now, an AFA alone will not get you superior client service, but it is one more tool in your toolkit to get you to superior client service and, oh, by the way, get you substantial business as you're moving forward. As you know, every year we go out, we ask 330 corporate counsel who is best at each of the 17 activities. We tally that up and use nothing but client feedback. Unprompted, as you know, no law firm can submit their name, referrals, or self-nominate. You can see Jones Day returned to #1 after a few-year absence. Denton's rocketed up to #2, so as they have added lawyers and have grown around the world, they have improved their client service because they're reaching out to clients as they do it. Skadden is at #3, who has been on the list 15 out of 16 years. Cooley is a relatively new reappearance. They've been on the list twice. But a couple of quick things to take away. If you look at the firms that are in the top 10, 7 of them have been on this list at least 14 out of 16 times. Of those firms, almost all of them, despite their skill and their prowess in client service, have stopped sometime in the last 3 to 5 years and actively found ways, change their firms to improve their client service even though it was already good. Jones Day did this about 3 to 4 years ago. Skadden did it about 4 years ago. Latham did it about 3 years ago. Sidley did it about 3 years ago. So the list goes on. The other thing you'll notice about the BTI Client Service 30 this year is there are many more big names and more volatility. 53% of the firms that were on here last year are not on here this year, replaced by mainly larger firms. Why the larger firms? Not surprising. They're investing more in their clients and their client relationships. A couple of key things that they're doing. First, last year we talked about embracing, that is, learning what the new generation GC demands for metrics and measures. Now these firms are anticipating. They know what their clients expect and want for metrics. They know what they're looking for. They know what they need in terms of updates, in terms of being able to educate them at the right time and the right place. So they're now playing ahead. They're playing offense instead of defense. Educating individual clients on new approaches to strategies. So this was something else we heard about the BTI Client Service 30 this year, is that they were, education right now, when we went out and asked what are the most innovative things that a law firm is doing, the top answer was educating clients. We did not yet hear about Watson. We look forward to the day that we do. But right now it's educating clients. How can you teach them something about what they're doing that they don't know? Providing risk management tools, which we talked about in the recommendations. A list of things that clients should be worried about, whether it's risk, how to increase their throughput, how to even manage up. Clients want to know, how do I manage my board? I have these huge exposures in bet the company work, or in my class actions, or in some of my product liabilities. How do I manage these? I need an experienced hand to help me. Delivering constant design and delivery. This is where you go out and you ask clients how they would like their budgets delivered, how they would like their updates, how would they like their communication, how often would they like their communication. Letting them design it and letting them tell you, and then you, of course, delivering according to their process, which will do a lot to exceed client expectations. Talking business and law. This was a very big theme, and it is tied directly to the increase in class actions and bet the company work. The biggest factor in selecting a law firm for bet the company work is the law firm's ability to understand the risk the company faces so that they can advise the company properly and take the proper steps legally. That's what clients tell us consistently. So these firms have figured out how to show their understanding of the client's business and mix it together with the law. And then finally, perfecting the art of the AFA on a client-specific basis. So it's not just having a good AFA process, but it's having a good AFA process with each individual client. Now, if we're talking about excellent client service, there's not too many law firms that have to overly worry, because we asked a whole group of law firm partners how they viewed their client service on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being best. You can see that they rank themselves an 8.9, and the range, the lowest, the weakest was 7. This vertical line is the range of answers we got, and up to 10. So the partners are feeling generally pretty good about their client service. So if you're trying to have a conversation about why they should improve, well, if they're doing pretty well, they're going to think the improvements are going to be only incremental. But when we asked clients to rank their partners' performance, we got, as you can see, an entirely different answer. We got 8.5, which the difference between 8.5 and an 8.9 is roughly 5% growth in a particular client in a year. That's what it translates into. You can see some clients giving their partners a 3, a 4. There's a whole group that get 9s and 10s, but look at the difference. And if you want to see a side-by-side, what you'll see is clients see tremendous inconsistency and generally lower score. The partners see a pretty tight range of consistency that generally is pretty good. So if you're going to bet that, you know, the partner assessment is accurate, I would probably want to bet on the client assessment because they get to make the decisions. And this self-perception is not all that unusual. Many professions, we find that the individual practitioners rate themselves higher because they don't often have a frame of reference. They don't know how others are performing, that is, your competitors. They don't fully understand what clients expect and what they want. So they find themselves in a position where, because of a lack of information, they think they're better than their clients do, which starts to lead to a breakdown and makes it very difficult to go out to gain share in today's tremendously competitive marketplace. And of course, if you think that you might have any of these issues or perceptions at your firms, this is something that we could either help you do on your own or we could help with, but we manage this all the time with our clients and use it and try to correct it. Just as the final reminder, the reason we focus so much on client service, the benefits: you'll get double the fees from a single client, you'll get 36% higher growth, 33% higher client retention, 33% higher profits, and 20% rate premiums. So all these recommendations and effort are more than worth doing. Your return on investment is extraordinary. The question is, how do we get started? When do we start? and how do we make this work to our advantage before everybody else. With that, I certainly hope you've enjoyed today's webinar and that you found it helpful.